Welcome to the Clarity Advisor Show, where you'll learn how to grow your team today. Join Ken Trupke and his guests as they discuss what works and doesn't work to grow your team in today's world. And now, your host, Ken Trupke.
Hello, and welcome to the Clarity Advisor Show. Communication skills are the foundation of leading teams. Every time you speak or write, you have the chance to shape beliefs and inspire others to act. My guest today, Bart Egnal, is the CEO of the Humphrey Group, a firm focused on teaching leadership communication skills to executive leaders. Welcome, Bart Egnal.
Yeah, thanks for having me this show. It's great as someone who does podcasting. It's great to have the mic on the other foot, if to mix metaphors, and to be on your show. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. This will be fun. So let's just jump right in. What problem does the Humphrey Group solve, and who are your typical clients?
So I'll answer those in the opposite. So our typical clients, really, when I started in the business 20 some years ago, were CEOs. We worked with them to prepare them for speeches. So I started my career as a speechwriter. We would write the speech with them so they had something inspiring to say, and then coach them on delivery so they could deliver it with authentic presence. We still do some work with CEOs, but our clients are everyone. And really what's happened, and the problem, to answer your first question, the problem that we solve is that everyone's success these days, whether you're in sales or in IT or in banking or whatever industry you're in, whatever profession you're in, your success stems from your ability to communicate in a way that essentially gets people to believe what you think and act in a way that supports you. So we think that's not something that you're born with, a skill that's innate, but rather something that you can learn, you can be taught, you can hone and develop in a way that's authentic. And that's what we do. We teach people that skill.
Okay. And so your clients are no longer just CEOs, but other executives? Are you teaching frontline leaders as well?
Yeah. It's funny. I mean, I would say that probably half the people who take our programs, and, we'll have thousands of people a year go through our training. Half of them probably don't even have a single direct report. They might be individual contributors. They might be specialists. They might not even want to manage people, right? But their success still stems from that ability to communicate persuasively or inspirationally.
So one of the roles that you identified, I think it's on your LinkedIn profile, but you've got roles of your role as the CEO of the Humphrey Group is to forge partnerships with your clients to understand the role communication plays in the success of their leaders. Talk about that.
Absolutely. Just because everyone needs to communicate persuasively, every company needs leadership communication skills, doesn't mean that they all need exactly the same thing. So when you're working with, we work across so many industries, so probably the biggest industry we work with would be financial services, but we work with industrial companies like railways. We work with mining companies, technology companies. And when you look at these companies, the cultures that they have, the roles that they have are all very different. And that then drives a different demand for specific communication skills. So look, let me give you some tangible examples. If you're talking about, like, one company I think about where it's a private equity firm, we work with them on helping them articulate to potential investors and existing investors why they're a compelling choice as they raise capital, right? That is a very, we're talking about a very specific story that they want to tell to a very, an audience that's used to listening to a lot of potential pitches. That's a very specific skill set that we're working on versus an industrial company that's training supervisors who have really never had any training. They're in the field. They're not going to come into a classroom. Their leadership communication situation that they have to thrive in is the Monday morning line out meeting, right? Where they're talking to people who are going to go down, say, into a mine. And so both audiences need to be able to define, articulate ideas with confidence and presence and credibility, but very different applications, very different needs. So when we partner with them, we start from the standpoint of saying, help us understand, like, who is in your company, where does communication drive their success, and what kind of specific audiences and skills do they need to work on? From there, we adapt, not necessarily intellectual capital that we teach, because there are some foundational principles, but how we would teach it, the scenarios we teach, and where they apply.
So when you go into a company, first off, how do they find you, or how do you find them? How do you get connected?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, because when I look at our, we've been around for over 30 years, and we, if you look at our top 20 enterprise clients, every year they've been with us. They go back year after year after year, and there's always one or two new ones who come in, or cycles happen, and one or two drop out. But we have huge tenure, so it really, it usually starts with one person who needs a program. Often they've taken our training in the past, they've moved companies, and they bring us to their new company. That was historically how people would find us. It was kind of, we would follow them through their careers. But what's really happened in recent years is, we've also started sharing a lot of our content with the world for free. I do a podcast, where we give away content. We have blogs, we do webinars, and so people consume this content and they're able to evaluate, hey, what the Humphrey Group is offering really is helping me with this challenge of building my leadership communication skills, or also my diversity, equity, and inclusion leadership communication skills. And then they call us. So we have, when I look at it, I talk to my head of growth, we have between 50 and 70 inquiries every month where people will come to our site and they'll message us and, hey, I'm interested in talking. And we're not right for all of them, but there's a heavy inbound flow of people who want to explore how we could support them and their companies.
Okay, so now you get connected to a company. How do you go about determining who needs what kind of training? You talked about the difference between like the private equity group and their audience, and a frontline leader at a mining company and his communication needs. How do you discern that and work with the client to figure out who's going to need what and then tailor that training?
Yeah, well, it's all about listening. I mean, everything for us is client-led, right? So when you come to us, the first thing that we do is we listen. We don't just listen passively. Like, my view is, look, if you knew what you needed already, you would have just told us, right? If we would have delivered it, right? Most people come to us because they know like communication is important. So I'll give you an example, but they don't quite know what they need. So a couple like hypothetical scenarios that occur frequently. We get a call from a CEO who says, look, I've got this, this happened in the last year. I have a chief technology officer, brilliant mind, so good at what he does. The board can't understand what he says. It's indecipherable technobabble. And he says, why should I have to dumb it down for the board? And I'm worried, the CEO said to me, I'm worried that the huge technology transformation agenda that we have is going to fail if he can't communicate. So she knew he needed some training. She wasn't quite sure. So for us then, it's about, okay, let's talk about what you're seeing. Let's talk about the communication. Let's talk about the audience. And from there, we design a program. Or in another scenario, we get a call from a company that says, look, we have this high potential as a banking client, high potential talent group. We've got 30 leaders. We want to do a piece on communication. Well, okay, great. Tell us about the leaders. Are they all from the same function? What audiences do they have to reach? Why do you believe communication is important? Tell us about your leadership model. What scenarios do they need to be good? What have you observed? So we kind of we start from this standpoint of really trying to understand for your business, like, what are you trying to do as a business? Like, put communication aside. What are these people, what role do they have in making that happen? And how does communication enable that? And from there, we can then determine what kind of training that they are going to be best served. But instead, we propose a few things to just see what lands, and then we design it from there. So it really is a dialogue. They say, what, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And I find that with training needs, there are some commonalities, but every client has a unique need that we have to really listen carefully to.
Yeah, I've found that as well, that while there's similarities or those rhymes where you feels like what's happening here, there's also some different specifics that are unique to that client, and you need to pay attention to both. I think there's value, though, in coming in and saying, I haven't seen your situation, but I've seen a situation like this. Because I liken it to the doctors. Like, the last thing you want when you walk in to see your doctor and you have some issue, he's like, boy, I have no idea. I have never seen that before. I don't know what to do. That's not what you want to hear. You want to hear that confidence of like, yep, know what's going on here. It might be a couple things. We're going to do some tests. I'm going to listen and get your specifics, but generally I have a handle on this. Because when you come in and the client wants that. And so it's interesting, though, sometimes you get clients that say, like, unless you know our industry, you can't help us. Have you found that or run into that?
They want to say we can't help us, but they're like, tell us what you know about our industry, and have your facilitators work with industry X. And usually we can help them understand that, look, we're not there as consultants to really understand their business, but we understand communication and leadership communication. And there are some commonalities. And what's fascinating is that, even the concept of industry from a communication standpoint, take financial services. Like, you can say, oh, you're in banking. But I'll tell you, some of the banks we work with have IT divisions that are essentially like small companies to mid-sized companies, And so are they banking or are they IT? So even the industry, or, you'll have an internal group that's really like a consulting team. So it's really, defies categorization. But we almost always see the communication imperatives, are drawn from a common trough.
Yeah. Now, you've mentioned, facilitators. What is kind of the structure of your team, and what are the roles on your team?
Yeah. So we have, the Humphrey Group has about globally 25 employees. And then we have, it varies, but probably 35, experienced facilitators. And, we do, so when you come to us for training, right, you're not hiring me or, Patrick, right? We're listening to you're hiring the Humphrey Group, because what we can do is we can deliver at scale. So for example, a company might say, look, I'm going to run, like I remember one mining company we worked with for many years. We're running a supervisor leadership cohort program. So we're bringing supervisors together in all these jurisdictions, right? We've got people in Mexico, we've got people in Western US, we've got people in Vancouver. And so what we as a company do is we're not just saying, oh, I'll come deliver. It's we'll do that listening, we'll design the program. And then we have the experienced facilitation team who we do, as a bit the opposite of what I was saying, do we have people who know your industry? We do try and match people with the program and the audience, so we'll have people, a very basic thing is, do they speak the language? When we do programs in Latin America, we have facilitators whose first language is Spanish. In Quebec, I'm based here in Toronto, we have programs in Quebec where we have Francophone instructors. But, beyond that, we look for people who have experience with that company or that industry or those particular challenges with that level of seniority. And one of the great things when you have, 35 talented people in all sorts of geographical locations is you can do that. And you can bring them together. So the other thing is, we believe skill development in leadership communication comes from practical application. It's a skill. And if you think about, the only thing I can equate it to is I grew up playing basketball, right? You can go watch guys in the NBA or gals in the WNBA playing. You're like, wow, that free throw form is amazing. But you're never going to become, a Steph Curry free throw shooter just by watching, right? You have to get out on the court, and then you need someone really to coach you and provide feedback on the mechanics. And then as you practice the new mechanics, to provide feedback to build the skill. So we think communication is the same thing. No matter how you speak, there's some fundamental, almost think of them as muscle memories that you need to be taught and you need to apply, and then you need to get feedback on. And that's done ideally one-on-one, but more frequently in groups over a period of time. So, and we think the smaller the better. So we always kind of aim for, 8 to 10 to 1 and trying to break our delivery up. So if you were part of a program, you might go through, say, 4 modules over the course of a month. And you'd also have some private coaching with your coach. And so the idea is that you're learning, you apply the skill of something that you have. Hey, what's the biggest opportunity you have coming up? Let's work on the message to that, get some feedback. Hey, next session, let's talk about how you present it. Let's do a delivery. Let's do mock Q&A. And so that over time, you build the memory through it. So by having that global pool of facilitators, we're able to bring multiple people together to provide that small group training. So that's really what the experience is like of going through a group program with us.
Oh, that's so interesting. Now, I've got some questions about your team and things you've seen with other teams, and we'll do that on the other side of the break. So stay with us. We're talking with Bart Egnal on the Clarity Advisor Show.
Is your business where you want it to be, or on track to get there? Clarity Advisors helps business leaders improve communication and get your team aligned and engaged for greater success. We specialize in helping you streamline your sales and operating systems to improve efficiency and grow your profits. Call or text Ken at 616-822-2998 to have a complimentary 12-minute call to see what some clarity could do for you.
Okay, we're back on the Clarity Advisor Show today talking with the CEO of the Humphrey Group, Bart Egnal. So Bart, you said your team right now is about 25. You obviously didn't start there. So talk about the evolution of your team and some of the things you learned in growing and building that team over the years.
Yeah, it's neat, by the way, to be able to talk about this, because most of the time I talk about what I teach, what I work with clients on. But I rarely talk about the business that I'm in. And, I always, so the history on the Humphrey Group is my mom started in 1988. She was a speechwriter. She saw this opportunity. And that was her passion, the speech writing and the working with executives. So when I joined in 2001, it was her, she had an assistant, and then we had a couple talented consultants, and that was it. When I came in, I learned the business as a speechwriter. And I thought, my God, first of all, speech writing is a huge pain in the ass, and it's going to die, right? It's like, it's dying. We're headed to, technology is democratizing communication. It's driving the imperative that everyone in the organization does it down, and the frequency is going to go up. So I really started to build my practice in the area of some of the things we talked about earlier, which is group training, a bit more executive coaching. And I saw this growing demand. And I really thought, look, I think we make such an impact. I saw it through the work that I did. I want to grow the business. And so, my mom said, okay, so we kind of tried for a few years. And then I moved to Vancouver in 2009 to really open an office and say, all right, I'm going to give it a go and start hiring some people seriously, because I felt like there was an untapped market for us in Western Canada. And so from there, we've grown the business, and it's been really exciting, and I'm really blessed with the people I have, on my leadership team. I have two people who've each been with me for a decade. I've had some other long tenured people who have then gone on to great new opportunities, which I'm thrilled for them on. And then we take pride in bringing up and developing our talent. So I've learned a lot. I think you learn a lot through your mistakes, but I think there are a couple of things that I would take away in building a training company, which is really what we are. And the first is that you really have to invest time and energy in the recruitment, onboarding, and development of people. We have a phenomenal vice president of people and operations, Marissa. She and her team have built this engine to bring great talent to the firm. We've embedded a lot of inclusive hiring practices so that we can tap into the broadest pool, be equitable, inclusive in who we attract and how we onboard. And then we have pretty rigorous development. And, the only year or two that we've missed on that, we've really paid for it. We saw the downside. So it means when someone comes in, you can't expect that they're ready to produce and perform in your company. You really have to spend the time to teach them what it is that we do, how we go to market, how we deliver with excellence. And that means a lot of hands-on guidance and training. And so I'm really proud that we've developed some really capable people. Sometimes they get developed to the point where they get recruited by other companies, which I just take as flattery, because that shows, our farm team system has developed, all-star caliber players. But you got to put that time in. So that's one thing I've learned. I think a second thing I've learned is that you really need a robust framework around job descriptions, role design, comp philosophy that you can communicate to people. Early in my career, there was a lot of ambiguity, because I was kind of building it as I went, and I just didn't have the support of someone like a Marissa or the processes. And it's challenging for people. They're like, well, where can I go in a small company? What is my job? I'd say, oh, you're doing that. Why you do that? Why you do that? And it was kind of a recipe for, it was like a pie eating contest for these people where the prize was more pie until they choked, and that's on me. And so now it's, with a lot more of the, clarity and rigor around, like, this is your job. Here's what the band compensation system looks like. Here's what, mid performer, high performer. And here's, so even though we're a small company, people tell us that they appreciate that. And we had the, highest engagement levels ever in our last 2 years. And so I would say that's the second thing. You really do need to invest that time in the process. And I think the last thing is more just a philosophical change of thinking that I've had. When I started building this business, I had, in terms of hiring people, when I moved to Vancouver, I had this dream. I'm like, oh yeah, we're going to find people, like-minded people, going to hire them, and they'll be with me forever. Yeah. And, it was naive. It was naive. It is a business. Like, Reed Hastings, it talks about Netflix. We're not a family. We're a high-performing sports team. And, people leave in free agency. I always took that personally. Now I look at them like, great. If we can't give them the opportunity and work they need now, that's more power to them. At the same time, as a business owner, you have to look every year and you have to say, does this person's skills or roles align with the priorities and imperatives of the business? And frankly, if they don't, you have to move them into another role, develop them to the point where they can, or have them leave. Because it's not fair to the organization and everyone else to have that person stay in a role that doesn't fit. And it's not fair to them, to be honest. I've had that where I've tried to contort the organization and the role around the person because I like them so much, and it never ends well. So that's been a hard lesson for me to learn. But I think, we're in a healthy place where we can have those challenging conversations as a company.
Yeah, to your last point, I've found too that when you do that, and I've done it too and seen other organizations do it, where you like the person and they're such a good fit in a lot of ways that you try to make a role that works, and you're really doing them a disservice because they need to grow and be free to go thrive somewhere else. And when you kind of figure out ways to keep them, you're really serving yourself. And you're right, I've never seen it end well. At any time they actually did move on, then I've always felt better about it. They felt better, like, oh yeah, we should have just done that at the beginning instead of trying to find this convoluted way of making it work.
And it's really hard because, you come, especially a smaller company, you come to really like the people you work with, right? Mm-hmm. And you're like, wow, this is a great person. I enjoy them. And so it's really difficult. Like I wrestle with, you think about like in the NFL, I'm a big NFL fan. In the NFL, they talk about the very different roles of the GM and the coach, right? The coach is like, I got to take the team I have and I got to win today. The GM, like, well, what's the long-term, how do I align the resources and people for the long-term viability of the organization? And so as owner and CEO, I have to wear both those hats. It's very difficult. I find that challenging because you're like, this person's awesome. This person's given me so much, but this person is not right now in the right role. And so then you have to kind of switch to your owner GM role and say, like, how do I reallocate this person in the organization? Or if I can't do that, how do we say goodbye? And so it is emotional. It's very difficult. I think if you ever stop feeling that pain, you're probably in the wrong job, because it means you don't care about the people. But you've got to take care of the long-term interests of your clients and your company and your staff.
Right. We're in business to serve clients, and we need to put the best team on the field to do that. And sometimes it requires making those hard choices. Yeah. And I'm totally on board too with the idea of it's a team, not a family, because the analogy just works so much better and takes out a lot of the weirdness and awkwardness. So yeah, appreciate that. So you've been doing this for a couple decades now. What are some things that are different about leading teams today?
It's a totally different world. I mean, part of them are things that are different about leading teams. Part of them are things that I've just adapt and evolve. So, I think the world of leadership is very different for myself and all of our clients, and I think we're headed in some of those changes are very important and good, and others are just different and challenging. And I think, we're headed gradually in this way, but COVID dramatically accelerated the change. So what have I seen? So first, let me just highlight some positives I think that are way, so much better for employees, managers, and companies. The first is that, we are much more inclusive and accepting of people. When I started in the business, it was the kind of if you looked at leadership, it was like a guy like Jack Welch. And for those who don't know Jack Welch, he was this kind of lionized CEO of General Electric. And here's a shock. He was white. He was male. He was never wrong, right? Well, it turns out he was, in retrospect, he wasn't really as effective as he purported to be, but, often wrong, never in doubt. And there was this view that this was the only archetype, and you had to conform. You had to wear a suit. You had to wear a tie. Your personality was a welcome at work. And particularly for women and people of color, that was, there were not easy paths to the top. So, to say nothing of other equity-seeking groups. So I think the first big change is I see in our clients much more diversity in the executive ranks, much more understanding that you can be authentically yourself in leadership. And that's a good thing. and that we should support and encourage people to, lead their way. So I think that's been a great change that we've seen. I think a second change is that employees expect a much more authentic relationship with their company. The days of, I remember, advice I got from people or I gave to people as a coach, 15, 20 years ago was, you keep your mouth shut, you say yes to your boss, you do what you're told, and then you'll move up. And I'll tell you, I don't give that advice anymore. And you know what? I think it's great. People are much more, they feel a greater degree of psychological safety. No one talked about psychological safety. It was not a concept. It's like, you shut your mouth and do what the boss says. And now, people do feel like they should be able to speak their minds, not unfiltered, but with more authenticity. And companies, and I think we really saw this in COVID, it maybe is pulling back a little bit from it, but companies felt like we want to view you as a person and not just as a widget in our machine. And we're going to be more empathetic and more caring and more aware of your problems. And look no further than the huge tussle that's going on with return to work. Companies are trying, but it's fascinating. They recognize that for talent, they have limited cudgels to use, right? And they're willing to accept people a bit more on their terms. So I think that's been a big dialogue. So our tonal shift that's occurred. Now, I think the last change is a lot of my clients who are in leadership find it, I'll just say it, much less of a satisfying task these days. I mean, I remember 15, 20 years ago, I remember going to work with one client. I flew out to Calgary. This gentleman was in the oil and gas business. He was in the last couple of years of his career. So he said, I was going to coach him. He said, come to my office. So I arrive at the office. I'm ushered up a private elevator. I get to the executive floor. Welcome, Mr. Egnal. Can I offer you a beverage? We went into his office, and then there was a sub office behind you. So, it was just like entering the Gilded Age, and it was a great gig for him. It's like, now, COVID really destroyed a lot of the kind of perks that come with the traditional sacrifices of leadership. I mean, leaders always had to give more in terms of their time, personal life. I remember one CFO I worked with years ago. He's like, as soon as you become that C-level, you are a subordinate to your company's needs. Something happens on the weekend, you go. Something happens at night, you go. You get up in the middle of the night for a call, a publicly traded company. All those things are still true, but some of the perks are gone, and I also think, in the tenor, the demands from employees are greater. So just to give you an example on communication, it used to be we'd prep clients, executives for town halls in the pre-COVID era, and they'd deliver some tough messages, and they'd get a few cautious questions. Well, can you help me? How it is like things like Slido, upvoting, anonymity, to say nothing of the people who would just say what they think. The tenor of questions has gone from respectful to at times aggressive or even nasty, where you'll see people say, how dare you demand this of me? I saw your compensation package on, it's like, even like personal attacks on people. And that's, that's just a change, right? That's a change where you'll have leaders will say, I need this from you. And the person will say, no, I'm not going to do that. I mean, it's like, it is a total inversion of the way it works. So now I think a lot of the leaders I coach are saying, look, the demands on me have never been greater. The demands not only that I used to get from the board or the CEO to produce, that I knew I signed up for. But it's demands from my employees, who now view me as there to serve them. That former concept of servant leadership, it's like they're going to tell you how to serve them, and you better listen or else. So I would say that leaders, I find they're, in burnout much more. They're enjoying their jobs less. Let's put it that way. So I think that's been a big change. Wow,
there's a lot there. It's so interesting to hear that kind of frontline view and what you're seeing and hearing from people. And yeah, it's different for all those reasons that you outlined. So Bart, I know you're a reader and a continual learner. What are some things that you're consuming these days? Books, podcasts, videos, whatever?
Well, I think that's another great change. I mean, for my business, I remember when 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I go meet with an executive, and they'd say, tell me about what you're doing. I hear you did something for my colleague. Oh, this leadership communication. Wow. Never heard of anything like that. Hey, I never hear that anymore, which is a good thing. People have educated, they're excited. They've already pre-educated themselves. So a great trend now is, even if you're not in the seat, you don't need to go to Harvard's executive MBA program to learn about leadership. You have access to more content than you will ever be able to consume. Podcasts, video casts like this, books. I mean, people don't even seem to read books now because you can get Substack letters. You can get blogs. Your favorite companies will produce so much content, like the Humphrey Group, that, delivered right to your inbox, right to your LinkedIn. You can attend free webinars on, there is never been more content. Now, conversely, when you're drowning in content, real insights are hard to come by, and real coaching is tougher to get. But I think it's a great time to educate yourself for free on what it takes to communicate, or what it takes to lead more broadly.
And do you have a couple recommendations of things specifically in specific books or podcasts?
Well, look, I'll selfishly toot my own horn and say you should subscribe to the Inspire podcast. It's my podcast. We've just crossed 100,000 listens. It's not video, it's audio, but it's on all your favorite platforms. And you can buy my book. I wrote a book called The Language of Leadership, which looks at jargon and why you should stop using it. But there's a lot of great content out there. And, I would say, from a leadership standpoint, I'm trying to think of books. Like, I'll tell you one book I've really enjoyed recently is The Power of Pressure. I had Dane Jensen. He's CEO of Third Factor. CEOs and executives are under a lot of pressure now. And so Dane deconstructs pressure, what different kinds of pressure are and how to manage it, the intense event-focused pressure or the sustained pressure. So that's, a great read. I really recommend that. And I'm just going to glance over my library here and see, other things I've read, because I'm cutting through books frequently here. It's not because I'm in the leadership development space and I have so many people on my podcast talking about leadership, I also like to read books about leaders. And so the one I just finished, I was glancing over, was Walter Isaacson's bio of Elon. It is a great read. It is a great read. I have a Tesla. I have Starlink at my cottage. So I'm like, he's a fascinating guy. And I read. It's a great profile because when you read the book, you come away. I came away with three conclusions. One is, Elon is the most impressive person from a product standpoint I've ever seen, who has created not just one visionary company, Tesla, but SpaceX, Starlink, 3, right? So unimaginably brilliant in ways that, and when you read the book, you see how he gets in there, is that. Secondly, his appetite for risk is beyond measure. The times he comes close to destruction are amazing. And third, for my area of leadership, he would be a really terrible person for most people to work with, And it's really fascinating when you look at books around leaders and what they've achieved. And I think you got to look at it and say, and Welch was an example that, Elon, what is reasonable to emulate? And, I think Elon, it's a worthwhile read because you see how it would be a very difficult leadership style. It would not work in most places. It would not work in most places. And I think it's important as you cultivate your leadership to look at stories like that and say, what can I really, do or shouldn't do that will work in my life? So that was a great read. So there's a few examples of, I'm more of a big book reader, but there's a ton out there on LinkedIn you can subscribe to as well.
Well, that's terrific. And we'll get those in the show notes and your podcast and book in there as well. And so that brings us to the end. And Bart, I just thank you so much for being here. What would be the best way for people to reach out and connect with you?
Yeah, well, thanks first of all for having me on the show. This has been a great conversation about building my own leadership journey as well as leadership communication. And I love to talk to people. I've got the pod, but if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm pretty active on there. It's the only social media I really do. Please do add me, reach out to me. I encourage you to go to our website, thehumphreygroup.com, and subscribe to our newsletter. It's pretty slow. It's not just once a month, so you'll get kind of a digest rather than having a lot come across. We cultivate it and includes podcast highlights. Or if you want to reach out to me, feel free to send me a message on LinkedIn. I'm always open to connecting. And
terrific, and we'll get that in the show notes as well. And I've got to say, you just had me laughing. It was all I could do to not laugh out loud when you said it's like a pie eating contest where the prize is more pie. Yeah. That's such a solid word picture. I am absolutely going to be using that in the future. So thanks for that as well. Again, Bart, great having you here. Thanks so much for sharing your insights, and look forward to talking with you again.
Yeah, thanks for all you do on the show, and appreciate you having me on. Wish you the best.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, and that brings us to the end of another Clarity Advisor show. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Clarity Advisor Show. Clarity Advisors is a speaking, training, and consulting firm specializing in helping you simplify your sales and operating systems to improve efficiency and grow your profits. Connect with Clarity Advisors today to learn more about how they can help you improve communication and get your team aligned and engaged for greater success.